Hello, welcome back to Pause, Rewind, Play. Today, we're going to be talking about streaming infrastructure. And I am incredibly lucky to have my friend, buddy, good bud.
To be here on a Sunday afternoon for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. My good buddy, Chris Wood with me. How you doing, Chris?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
Good.
Very much.
Good kids.
We're going to talk streaming infrastructure.
We're going to try.
We're going to be all over it.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to dive in. But before we do, why don't you tell everyone who's watching just a little bit about yourself, what it is you're doing, your company, because you are, and it is worth saying, the series sponsor. So thank you very much for that.
Good.
Just tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm probably 25 years into OTT, media technology, digital publishing, streaming platforms. My organization is a bit of a sort of back-end platform specialist. We don't tend to deal in the front-end space so much. And we have a pedigree of building big globally selling platforms, right, from history where obviously we first met and bits and pieces. So yeah, that's a bit about us.
Fabulous. I mean, I think we know each other quite well, so they work together. And I think the great thing about your input today is going to be that this is all from the coalface, real world input. That you've been there, you've done it. These are not concepts or headlines you're discussing. This is real information, real experience, real feedback that you'll be showing.
We're going to try to digest the day job of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right then. So shall we dive in? Let's begin then with a little bit of definition around streaming infrastructure.
Okay.
How would you, for someone coming into this, maybe a viewer of the video that is picking up this domain of media entertainment the first time, how would you describe it?
Okay. So think of it in layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right on the bottom, infrastructure, servers, storage, tin, the stuff that we traditionally associate with major public cloud or private hybrid cloud providers. A level above this, application stack, right? So applications sit on servers and or serverless, right, depending on how you're building. And then if you were to kind of group those two things together, we end up with what we would call platforms. So if you take a streaming platform, it's what a lot of people refer to as the back end, right, fundamentally.
Yep. Yeah. That's a really good definition. Is there a view that getting this right, and when we think about the importance of it, and we were chatting before this episode started, and that there is a level of fundamentals or table stakes in order to get to something that is stable and solid, right? Because you can get streaming infrastructure from a variety of vendors these days, and it will be offered. I mean, it'll be offered with some kind of warranty and guarantee. But however, is there, when you get to offering a service to customers, is there a level of solidity and stability underlying that you just have to hit? Like table stakes is this, for example.
Yeah, I think so, right? From an infrastructure perspective, we now have more compute capacity capability than we have ever had before, right? We've now got GPU-backed instances, teraflops of compute power just on tap, and I think if you look at the role and responsibility of each area and you look at a public cloud provider providing that infrastructure, you almost now sort of take it for granted that they're doing what they can to offer you that compute, that infrastructure, that capacity, that throughput at levels that you need to build that reliable streaming platform. You've then got the bit over the top, or that sort of part that you're responsible for, which is that application stack and building that up. And that's where things get a bit interesting, because if you imagine a world historically 20 years ago, right, when a provider operating a streaming platform, let's say a provider offering a streaming platform. So I'm a major, I build a streaming platform in a box. I want to come and deploy that. I turn up and I've got access to a data center and a bunch of servers and storage and racks, and I put it in and I stick it in, and I have control over that entire ecosystem, right? How everything behaves, all the fine tuning behind that. And I think we've moved into a bit of a world now where that's not happening, right? We are bolting together streaming platforms through platform as a service, software as a service. We're not deploying data centers and racks anymore.
Sure.
So what you get is a great aspect of controllability over the stuff that you're plugging together to some extent. You can control features, you can control, how you sort of want things to work. The nuts and bolts under the hood, when you talk about performance, right, the things that drive a lot of those numbers, the KPIs of like, how quick is my API responding, right? Like, how much stuff do I get back as a 200 versus a 500 or something similar, right? Like, you don't have that control all the time anymore. You're in the hands of a lot of third-party vendors, and we're just bolting things together. So like, in one respect, it's easier, right? If I'm a product manager and I'm not an engineer, and a lot of people we deal with are just product teams, they don't have engineering resources. They're bolting these things together as product managers, and it works really, really well for them. But as an engineer, there's that frustration over you have no ability now to really influence some of what goes on. You can't even buy many applications in the same way that you could 20 years ago, where I want to buy an identity platform or an entitlement system, and I want to deploy that in my own environment. It's like everything's SaaS. The whole world is SaaS. Which
is great from a like you said, you get to define some of the characteristics of that maybe to begin with. How much compute, how much storage you need, like some of that dimensioning. But what you don't then get to, what gets abstracted and you don't get to control, is the performance of that system. Then that's the harder and easier bit, right? Because easier to plug it together, but harder to know about some of the performance characteristics that go with it. And then on top of that, and this is a great point that you'd made when we talked previously, is the application stack, right? So even assuming all of that supporting infrastructure works as a service seamlessly, you've then still got the application stack, which you've got to deliver on top of that. And that has its own challenges. Do you want to give us a view on some of the challenges that sit within that layer?
Yeah, sure.
So that's where you operate, right? And that's,
yeah.
This is where you can tell us
Yeah, right. So
a lot of real things.
So if we're talking about application stack there's application in the platform, there's application, the front end apps that consumers traditionally sit. So create a segue, right? So
I think when a lot of people hear apps, they think front
end apps, right? Consumer facing apps. But if we think about platform apps, it kind of, as we sort of mentioned, I'm not deploying apps anymore. I'm subscribing to a SaaS platform, right? I don't get control over where that platform is located, where it's hosted. Okay, like you can often make some a bit, right? Like if I want to put a mandate in as an operator around where my data is stored, I could use an EU data center versus a US data center, right? But fundamentally that's it. I'm abstracted, right? You are at the mercy of the capabilities and how that platform provider, or that, we call it platform software provider, because if we think the platform is made up of multiple bits of software, how they are typically operating and hosting. And you're right, like you amass tech debt in ways now that you didn't historically. An example of, I'm a service that I operate in Asia Pac, right? And I go and subscribe up to a bit of software, and the hosting location of that company is in US West 1 in LA, right? So you end up, when if you now come to that second piece, right? I'm building a consumer-facing application, right? As an operator, right, I typically, let's say hypothetically, I don't abstract everything through a middleware or something. I have an application that I've built. I have a development team, and they're going to that location to sign on a user and register them. I'm going somewhere else to do something else, and somewhere else to do something else. And you are just making API calls all over the globe. That comes with latency. It comes with all sorts of, challenges around it that you can't control.
What do you think some of the drivers of those, I mean, I can imagine maybe what they might be, but just for our viewers, like, what do you think some of the drivers of that is? Is it hit the deadline? Is that the driver sometimes, or is it other factors that that knowing look? What am I
allowed to say? Look, I think it's a deadline, right? A lot of people that build against an arbitrary deadline, right? I understand, right? If you think live sports, for an example, you can't move that deadline. The deadline is the deadline.
The event's the event.
The event's the event. Yeah, that's it. You're stuffed, right? So often you take either something that's available, that's easy to use, something that maybe is well priced, could be something that the wider organization or the parent company has adopted or used that you don't even get a say in, right? Sometimes you just force down a route of, we are using X for this or Y for that. That decision could be based on politics, like it sometimes is, right? You can 101 factors, right?
And the output of that, though, from when you have worked to get your streaming service up. You're leveraging infrastructure. You've maybe done some work up front. You are compacted a little bit by driving factors like timelines. So you end up with a service that can be offered. But then the impacts that can occur when you don't then have that consistent stability are impactful experientially upon end users, right? So now we're talking about the front end of the application. Stuff happens maybe that shouldn't happen, and that could end up frustrating and ultimately annoying customers. Things like latency kicking in, things like buffering events, all of video quality instability. There's 101 or another good example maybe is authentication failures or entitlement failures. So there's lots of different areas. We'll come on a bit to some of the challenges, but I guess my point was that when streaming infrastructure isn't stable, ultimately the customers feel the impact of it.
Yeah, but what do you do as an operator now? If you're just backing off vendor contracts, right? You're looking at an SLA. You're looking at the lowest common denominator of, who gives me, the worst response time, and that's my benchmark, right? Because you have to operate to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
You're putting in support tickets to a third party, hosting organization, not even a hosting, like a third party who is providing the software, right, or that component, and you're just expecting that they deal with it, right? We saw an SLA, and it still flabbergasts me to this day, where the SLA was deemed a good SLA. It was within the SLA if the API call responded with a 200 okay. So it's saying everything's okay.
Yeah.
Nothing in that SLA to determine how long it can take for that response call to happen. So to that point, right, you raise a case and you go, look, these APIs are taking 30 seconds to respond. Well, it's within the SLA, right?
Okay.
And it's unusable. Like as a developer or as an architect, you can't do anything with that. A 30, 45, 50-second API response time, get in the bin, right? Like you can't do anything with that.
Well, and just imagine, right, from a customer, you're like, well,
it's frustrating.
You're either going to A, wait for the spinner, B, start hitting
refresh or whatever.
Yeah, reloading the page, whatever it might be. There's a lot there that is there to impact the customer experience. And
you've got to think smart then about how you build it. Like how can I sort of intercept some of those scenarios? How can I edge case that? Like, how can I build for the red path, not the happy path? How can I abstract for some of those problems? And it's harder to do.
And so, I mean, I think that talks very well to the importance of solid or stable streaming infrastructure. How about how that streaming infrastructure has come about over the last, I think you talked a little bit already, but I think you said it moved from a kind of a scenario of like data center and servers to what is now kind of SaaS or PaaS. And the interesting part of that is you end up with, in a way, the potential to have more features but less control, right? I think is that a good summary?
If we think about like challenges and where things are going, right, and what are the things that are keeping people awake at night, again, different answers to different people. Let's accept the fact that I don't have any control over some of what I'm using, right? Mm-hmm. That application stack, that infrastructure, it's what it is. But the thing I think that's starting to keep more people awake at night are the dollars that they spend on their platforms, right? Like how much is this stuff costing to operate? And it's interesting because there's a part of it which is like, internal operational costs, staff, resources, the OpEx bit. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the third party element, like the third party software providers, those kind of things, right?
Sure.
How are we going to make streaming more cost effective, right? There is a bit about like how we architect the platform, and it is hard, right? But how you architect it in that right way, how can you start to take where are the costly dollars, where are the costly bits of spend in these platforms and ecosystems? Yep. And I think there's this kind of piece of like the only way we're going to drive down some of that spend is the more efficient use of the compute and the servers and the infrastructure and the tin. And if we assume, again, we come back to our demarked line, right? And we say the infrastructure providers are doing their bit to make sure that's working as efficiently as possible. How as technologists and operators do we ensure that the people, the things that we are building in these platforms are getting the most amount of users or throughput per server, right? Or something similar.
Yep.
How do we reduce that TCO? How do you reduce tech debt? How do you get better utilization? You want 100,000 people, consumers against a server, not 50,000.
Yep.
Right? Because if you do that, less tin, and like there's a sustainability angle to that as well.
Yeah.
Which is then, the less compute you use, the less power, the less cooling, everything that kind of then tails off that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get better at reducing wastage, right? And it is tough because if you're just bolting together bits of third-party SaaS, people just go, well, it's sort of out of my control. It is and it isn't, right? It's like make smart choices. Yeah.
There's a lot of vectors to then to making those improvements. I think when you talked to me a bit about before was this idea of like users per dollar spent. I really like that as like a concept. So to focus on the platform TCO and that maybe use that as a metric, the optimization of throughput as well. And then we'll come to the sustainability bit in a minute, I think, because that's a really fascinating way. But talk to me a bit about some of the bottlenecks then that in that application domain, again, maybe back end versus front end, that require further optimization. Where have you seen some of those pinch points come before? Either from projects you've worked on or just your broader awareness of the industry. Where do you see that things? Because when we talk about challenges, right, the challenges end up being when it didn't work, right? When something went wrong.
Yeah.
So quite aside from the kind of ongoing, if you like, continuous improvement part, let's do better, let's be more optimal.
Yep.
Talk to me about some of the challenges in terms of when it doesn't work. What's happened?
We've had cycles for as long as I can remember. I'd like to say you're as old as I am. I mean, we're probably not too far apart.
I might be a little bit further along.
Careful now.
But in my 4,000 weeks, I think I'm like, well, past halfway.
So if we look, we've heard this argument, right? We're going to run out of bandwidth. Like I've lost count of how many times I've heard the bandwidth debate thrown around, right? Everyone's, we need to change the way we do things. It's all about the bandwidth problem. And I there's always bandwidth on tap, right? We've had advancements in things like dark fiber and connectivity. Some of the innovations that I'm sure we'll kind of touch on are helping that. But I don't think now that the bandwidth argument sort of maybe flies so much, right? And it comes back to how we are building better applications and building better systems. Those pinch points are, the components that take peak concurrency, right? That's where things fail. And if you, we operate across like M&E and it's a straightforward sort of VOD services, and then live and live sports, live entertainment, and it's that peak concurrency that kills things. Because in the moments after a live event, you get nothing, everything, right? Massive incremental traffic. And making sure that you can respond to that quickly, either through pre-provisioning, pre-warming, preparing for that to come in advance,
Because in some respects, almost it's not an unknown that peak is coming.
Yeah.
That kind of like super wave, if you like, that maybe you're scaling, we'll come to scaling in a second, but because this is, I think, a segue into that, but you're thinking about peak volumes, like what is my total number of users going to end up being, total number of active users. However,
you shouldn't care though.
You maybe shouldn't care, but you're thinking about those things in terms of when you start to scale.
Yep.
But you are then thinking to yourself about that peak concurrency. And my point is that you have some, because it takes sporting events, for example. When that is, and in that during the period of the match or the game or whatever it might be, the event, that's going to be very high concurrency. But you also know that you're going to go from much, much lower levels to very, very high levels in a very short space of time, pre-match or pre-game or whatever it might be as well.
Yep.
So that peak concurrency, I guess my point is, it's not an unknown. It's not like you're going to get hit by a
well, it's coming
that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, it's coming, right? But again, if you take a world where I could, if I've got a development team and I'm building an application, I'm deploying it in a major public cloud provider, I have more control, right, over how that scales and how that's built than I have if I'm taking a piece of third-party software as a service, right? Where I've maybe given them a user volume or a user count or a user prediction, but do we know how that element in somebody else's third-party control will respond when the going gets a little bit tough? And I don't know if we do. And that's,
and there are many examples that prove that sometimes we don't, right? So
many, yeah, for sure.
And so that bit about peaks that you get and where let's kind of think about this in the context of a service that's operating at scale that has global reach, and that has built, if you're building your service initially, as many streaming services out there, they're built with on-demand assets. And maybe over time you start to build in additional things, and maybe at some point you decide, right, I want to do something with live. Does having a very well scaled on-demand system mean you can do live? I think I kind of saying this hoping I know the answer, but
there are bits that will port for sure, right? But it's very different, right? To your point, things behave and scale in very different ways. And in a VOD service, you don't have peak concurrency, right? In a live service, you do, and it's that peak concurrency. It's rarely the case that if you look and do some research on some of the major outages over the last 10 years, it's really CDNs, right? It's not about running out of capacity anymore. It's about other things. It's about entitlements is the big thing, right? Content entitlements, authentication, authorization of users. Those are the pinch points. It's the bit when people come to the service and they got to do a token refresh. But people aren't logging on 15 minutes before an event. They're logging on 60 seconds or 30 seconds before an event.
Yep.
So it gets steep and it gets heavy. And again, if that's in somebody else's control and they just can't respond to that demand for capacity and throughput in the way that you need, you're stuffed, right? It's your brand, it's your app, you're taking the brunt from frustrated and angry consumers, unhappy users when it doesn't work.
And just to talk about that point you mentioned about distribution for a second, you made a great point when we talked before this episode about we're still using, in many cases, concepts and technologies that may be like up to 20 years old.
Yep.
That is a point that maybe shouldn't be forgotten either. The large bulk of what is out there, the technologies, the designs, the concepts that are powering these services are, I say maybe old is the wrong word, aging rapidly. Is that?
Let's call them proven.
Yeah.
Proven. But you're right. They are, right? So we've gone in the last maybe 10 years, 15 years where a peak concurrency across OTT or, live streaming, right? Streaming infrastructure was in the realm of 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, right? That's what we sort of deemed as good for our industry,
sure.
Right? We're 10 years on from that, but now, we're looking at 50 million, 60 million, 70 million, 90 million. But the technologies that we're using to stream, right, the HLSs, the dashes, the low latency HLSs, they're still the same stuff that was built, the same protocols, the same methods, the same way of working that we had all of that time ago. So our industry benchmark and our yardstick has changed, but the way that we're using technology to deliver that hasn't, right? And I think there are technologies and capabilities that we have tried in the past. We've done to death the multicast thing of we'll just distribute unicast. How many times have I been in trouble in companies I've worked for in the past for flooding networks with multicast packets by accident?
Not many, hopefully, but
it's easy to do, right? So to get to that next 60, 90, 100 million, I believe we probably need to change the way that we're thinking about delivery, because this sort of straightforward way of how we manage it today. And I don't mean this in just CDN bits and bytes. I think the whole package, the whole way that we change this, I think has got to be mixed up a little bit.
Hello. I hope you're enjoying the conversation in today's episode. I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you to Spicy Mango, who are our Series 1 sponsor. If you're looking to build global scale media and digital publishing platforms, Spicy Mango bring that serious expertise. They dig deep, they look at your business goals, and they ensure technology actually does what it should do in order to drive growth and remain cost effective. You can get in touch with them at spicymango.co.uk. And with that, let's get back to the episode. What about, one of the challenges that perennially exist is, and has become much more of a focus topic of late, is sustainability. What are the? I think maybe there are some abstract kind of statements that you can make around sustainability, and these are ones I'm kind of fully invested in, but being able to do more with less, which I think we talked about a little bit earlier, and enforcing some kind of shared responsibility, because as you mentioned before, our infrastructure is oftentimes not just owned by any one entity. There is a combination of plug together, several networks involved oftentimes. So there is necessarily there are a number of stakeholders. In the work that you've done, where is sustainability sat, and what is the attitude taken towards it?
It peaks and troughs in terms of some of the conversations. I think some organizations have a really nice focus on it, but again, I do believe that we're very blasé about it sometimes, and I think we just assume that it's an infrastructure only problem, right? And that the cloud providers are dealing with that, and it's okay, and it's their responsibility to make sure that we use power efficiently and cooling efficiency. And whilst that's sort of true, right? I think there was a stat like the digital industry is like carbon footprint is about 3 to 4%. Streaming is 1% of that, but by comparison, the airline industry is about 3% or 4% on its own. So we think of aviation being that massive polluter, but it's really not out there on its own anymore, right? We're catching up, data centers and all that kind of governs. I think it comes back to the way that we try to get more out of what we've got on tap, right? And how we extract maximum performance with that. How do we solve tech debt? And that's not just the external SaaS providers or the PaaS providers. I think that's like, if we've got development teams, if you're an operator that is running a team of people, are they building stuff for scale, right? Building it to extract every last bit of juice out of that tin. And I don't think they are, because our world is generally very feature driven. Like roadmap,
I think that's the first statement.
Roadmaps are feature driven. It's okay, well, we have a capability in a set here, we want to be X in 12 months time, and it's just a race to get that delivered, rather than how do we deliver it and how do we deliver it efficiently and really well. And if you ask an organization when they last performance tested an environment and got some meaningful data out of it and then acted on it, it's very few, very, very few.
It's a great point about being feature driven rather than necessarily, because when you squeeze everything out you can in terms of optimizations, you get, you're getting your maximum level of performance. Conceptually, theory, for the same amount of users, load, what have you, then you're using less of those resources to do it.
And then it's less dollars spent on the platform, right? So it all leaps back nicely to how do you lower the TCO of these platforms.
I haven't seen that argument made as joined up in it as eloquently as that before. I think it's a really compelling and important point that I hope it draws more attention over time. There is invariably a focus on the commercial side of things, but how it can be beneficial from a sustainability perspective, I don't know if that's a sidecar conversation normally, or maybe it's not even there at all.
I think it's relevant, but it's dollar driven, right? We have I say we again, like as an industry, right? Teams have a habit of raising money to build features, right? It's easy to go back to a business and say, we're going to build a feature, we want X number of dollars or pounds, and that's going to equate to X number of new users onboarded, right? We rarely do the same for, can I have a big pot of money to help reduce the amount of money that we're spending? And it's because it's a really hard argument, because you'd think that reducing the OPEX and the spend and the CapEx and everything that comes with it would be a really big driver, but the industry doesn't report on how much do our platforms cost. It's about churn. It's user onboarding, user offboarding, and maybe some element of profitability.
Right? I kind of get it. I mean, so that's a little bit around challenges. We're going to talk about innovation. We're going to talk about the futures, but first, important things. Shove a biscuit, Blake.
It's been too long. They've been staring you out for a while.
I'm looking at you, and honestly, I spent 70% of my time looking at biscuits and 30% with you, but hey, look, they are chocolate-covered biscuits.
They're good biscuits.
Right. So just viewers at home, we've gone M&S with the biscuits. Other biscuit options are available. So what if you had to pick out of that lot, would you choose?
Am I only allowed one?
No, not at all. No, you can.
I like the solid ring. I like the solid choice. It's a good solid. That's a dunking biscuit.
Yep, I think it's a solid biscuit. I love a white chocolate biscuit, frankly. So, do you want to go first?
Let's do it.
Dive in. I should pick up one of those. Right. There may be some crunching and chewing on biscuits. I'll ask my question and then eat in between. So we would just to kind of mildly go back to the more serious stuff for a moment. So we're talking about, or we're going to talk about a little bit about innovations in the future of streaming infrastructure. And when we talked before this episode, there's a lot in here that we could talk about, right? And I think as we talk a little bit about futures, no doubt we'll come to the wonderful gift that keeps giving, which is AI, and we'll talk about that in its many flavors. But there were some other innovations that you mentioned that were really interesting too, and I know you were kind of quite keen on the way of things. So, for example, 5G was one area that you thought had not even has tremendous potential. I think it's delivering that innovation and development is delivering real world results that we can see on TV today, right?
Yep.
Both from maybe from a distribution perspective. So we see that customers have, fixed line broadband, but they have some support from a sidecar mobile cell that they're able to switch over to if there's an issue with the fixed line. But actually, not just for distribution consumption, but also for production.
Yeah,
which is really interesting too. So, and I know you had some thoughts on this as well. I mean, do you want to kind of fill out for the viewers a little bit around how you've seen that mobile cell evolution and where you think the real benefits have come in?
Yeah. Bonded cell services started to enjoy really good prominence years ago, right? The thing that historically always let down what was 3G and 4G, the speeds were great when you get there, but the latency values are quite high, and 5G does a lot to address that. So 5G latencies are really good, probably better than a lot of broadband out in rural areas. So to be able to now do a bonded service on a 5G, if I'm out recording something or I'm filming and I want to upload that, is perfect. If I am a consumer and I want to consume over 5G, it's equally as good, right? Yeah. It's. I think the reliability still struggles, and people that I talk to, I have the same thing. Like I get a train, I live up in the Cotswolds, I get a train into London, and it's 5G in theory all the way, but you try to make a call and it drops. So I think there's some reliability to do with 5G. Satellite services generally, right? Starlink is another great example. Other services exist, right? The Amazon equivalent of that is also making some good traction. 3% of homes in Australia are now Starlink pillared, right? Uh-huh. In Nigeria, Starlink is the third largest ISP, right? Why is this relevant? So, again, as an industry, this switch from satellite, right, or DVB distribution into IP-based, we always use the argument of there are people that live in unconnected areas, and that's what's stopping a lot of that transition. And yes, I sort of agree with that. But it's not as bad, I don't think, as we probably think it is.
If you've got bridging options.
Yeah. And stuff like this now enables that bridging option. And there's a certain irony to it that we're trying to turn off satellite, but actually probably just relying on a different type of satellite, right?
Well, yeah, but I think that's exactly the point, isn't it? Is that you have, rather than necessarily needing a cable in the ground of some sort or another for your delivery, and potentially for your uplink, that you can create those, let's call them wireless bridges of one sort or another. Because you can't put that cable in, maybe, like you said, where you're living, and there's plenty of other areas too where it's just not viable nor feasible.
You can innovate, and you can roll out connectivity at a rate that is now unheard of versus digging up the ground.
Yep.
Fact, right? And it's rapid. And I think the more of that adoption, the better. Again, it's early stage innovation. It works. The latencies are mixed, but it's like, how scalable is this? If we move the world over from fixed broadband over to Starlink, we've not really at that point where we've proven out the level of satellite connectivity. I don't know,
but I don't. Is it binary in that way though? I think there's often times you can arrive at this place. You're like, well, it was this and it is that, or it must be this or it must be that. But I think actually the reality is probably going to be hybridity in some form or another. So you have cable fixed line connections where you can get them where they're fast, because often it's the case they're more stable or very, very stable at least.
Yep.
And you wirelessly bridge, whether it's satellite or mobile cell or whatever, that delivery in other places where you can.
Yeah.
But the generation of that technology keeps moving on, whether it's wired or wireless,
for sure,
to give you the bandwidth, to give you the latency boost. And I know it's something that you feel very strongly about. How, he says curiously, how do you feel though? How strongly do you feel about things like edge compute? Because
Nice idea. Quite hard, I think, to try to get there. And a lot of people
talk about it.
A lot of talk about it. If you think about, okay, compute requires a data center of some form, right? A cluster of compute and capacity.
Yeah.
And from what we know about working with public cloud providers, the size of those data centers are bonkers, right? And if you think about what edge is you're just taking out a bunch of hops and making it effectively as close to the last mile to the consumer as you possibly can, right? I don't know how viable it is. Transparently, right? I've not done the cost analysis. I don't know how viable it is to say, like, are you deploying a data center at an edge somewhere else? You know, if you think about an operator, right? The major sort of telco providers that we know and love.
Yeah.
Do they have the capability, the capacity to deploy data centers of that magnitude and provide that compute? Is the cost of doing that greater, equal that to, or less than the cost of just the backhaul? And as backhaul improves and we deploy more fiber and we move from 10 gig to 100 gig to whatever, right? Like, is that a cheaper way of working?
Maybe it has applicability in some domains more so than others. I think the question we're both heavily media and entertainment. The question I have is around adoption, right? So typically you find that over time, winning technologies get built into strategies and they get adopted very broadly. We talked about some of the delivery protocols and what have you.
Yeah.
But I think Edge does have some really good application use cases in domains like, for example, industry or IoT. Within industry, I think there is definitely some areas where I can see absolutely the applicability of that. But I think if we look at the adoption, if we just look at the adoption as evidence of where edge compute is right now, I don't feel it's been at the present day meaningfully adopted. Doesn't mean to say it can't be or won't be, but that I would just look at it through that lens and say, well, like where are we with it right now? Whereas if you look at, for example, like you said, with 5G or satellite delivery, this generation of satellite delivery, I mean, it's going great guns, right? It's flying along.
What is the problem that edge compute is trying to solve? If you ask that just dilute everything down to that base question, which is like, it's a latency thing, right? It's making it accessible as quickly as it possibly can. And I feel that there's probably more than one way to solve that problem, but there's that analogy, right? If all you've got is a hammer, every problem's a nail, right? So I don't know, like, I've seen the edge compute thing come and go over a long time. Hard to make a call is the honest answer. I don't see anybody really taking it seriously and offering edge compute as a service in that way at scale. Some of the public cloud providers, have got edge compute capability. It sort of works. It does certain things quite well and other things not so well.
I wonder whether there's an argument or a case for some of the media creation use cases that rely upon or can rely upon some very powerful edge compute to capture and process, for example, video and push that over. Maybe it's a 5G connection or something, whatever. Could even be a fixed line connection, but there is some logic and argument, I think, for it too. It's interesting. I mean,
it's maybe not even edge compute. Sorry, just like there is if we think go back to our servers, compute, storage infrastructure, GPU backed infrastructure and estate, and what that means, right? The capability that provides and the throughput and the high performance compute, I think, will probably outstrip any latency value that you get from doing a few other hops in the chain.
Yep.
So maybe there's something in that.
Okay. I mean, let's keep moving on innovation front, but let's do a bit of crystal ball gazing and look slightly further into the future. I mean, with that, we're now unleashed to be able to talk about AI in all of its many wonderful guises and different ways in which it's being leveraged today. What's your take on it? I'm gonna throw it out there in a kind of general sense, and then maybe we'll go more specific.
I think it has a long way to go, right? What we're seeing is sort of the early versions of AI. Think of this like a lot of what people are doing that we call AI it's a wrapper for what is ML, right? AI is like the human interface logic,
I love this point. You made it before.
right? Over machine learning. It's the ability to ask a human question, right? Or something in a way that can then translate that into machine learning or data extraction or some form of that. I think AI could be very powerful, and there are some great examples of it being done well. There really are, right? It's become the go-to buzzword again, maybe a little bit.
It's in every piece of marketing.
It's everywhere.
I think at the moment.
People feel they have to just capture that for some reason.
I think the point you made, that is a great one about ML techniques have been running your services for quite some time now already, doing various pieces of optimization or prediction, whatever the use case was for it. And actually the current buzz has come around that human interface upgrade, change, update, whatever you want to call it. And that really now I think there's almost an over rotation. We're kind of getting wrapped around the axle a little bit around the terminology and the use of it, and it's becoming. My worry is it's becoming a little bit maligned and almost not meaningless, but it means so much. Like it's used for so many things. Yeah. That actually you take away a bit of its value in the end, and I think it'd be a real shame, because I definitely do think there are specific areas where you can use it and implement it where it has a ton of value.
I agree. In the topic that we're talking about, infrastructure, platform services, where does it sit? I don't know yet. It's the honest answer. I haven't really found a very good use for it. In the application level, I want to build a consumer-facing feature. I want to move the needle on advertising or something. There's probably a use case for it. In terms of core platform services, I haven't really seen anything that's particularly blowing me away yet.
And to your point around where you see streaming infrastructure heading in the mid to longer term, I think what you said when we talked previously, your sense is there's like a leveling off or a maturation. Like we've gotten to this point where it's been there for a minute now, and well, hopefully there'll be that focus like we talked about previously on optimization and performance, and like making the best utilization you can of something, and lowering TCO. Is there any other? Because I know you're a bit of a fan of this concept to kind of GPUs as a commodity as well. Essentially, that you do all your optimization, and then some things that were specific before become more of a commodity, so you get to access those as well.
Yeah.
What's your sense of like have we kind of hit the adoption curve and we're leveling off at the top now, and we're thinking about how to optimize that flat line? Is that where we are?
GPUs, compute performance, will enable us to do things that I think have still been a little bit elusive without needing to do things at horrendous scale.
Yep.
So if we think about just-in-time encapsulation or just-in-time packaging, right, our ability to repackage stuff, that's been there for a long time. But just-in-time encode and transcode has been really hard to do. At scale. Yeah, exactly right. For a massive audience, the amount of estate that you need to do that, and GPU helps enable that. It comes back to having just ridiculous amounts of compute capacity on tap now. The 4K debate has been ripe recently, right, over is 4K sustainable?
Yep.
I talked about this a few years ago, and I have my own thoughts on this over that sweet spot. When you talk to audiences and consumers, and I don't mean people like you and I in this industry that are a bit nerdy over it. I mean, you talk to, like our wives, right, or your mum or whoever. They're not looking at bits per pixel, right, or those ratios, or what they're looking at is the difference, or the perceptible difference that doesn't necessarily come with 4K, but that comes with things like HDR, increased brightness, luminance, right? All those bits and pieces. And I think 4K has really, again, struggled a little bit. There's not as much 4K content.
Maybe not as much as you might
as you would think. 100%, right? It's been around a while now. Certain global streaming providers have even got rails for 4K content now, right? It's just not a given that everything is being upscaled or produced in that way. But this debate over is 4K the future, or is there a sort of a hybrid realm of 1080p plus HDR? I think that's a fantastic That's a great sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
But when you're not then generating 4K encodes, but you're falling back to 1080p encodes at high bit rates, that GPU-enabled compute advantage that you get and the ability to do just-in-time encode or just-in-time transcode, right? It becomes much easier to do. So we have all these innovations in our industry. We've got new codecs popping up. AVC, H.264 is old hat from a technology perspective, but still the mainstay, streaming format, because people don't want to go back and retranscode libraries, the cost involved in doing that. How do we leverage newer codecs and advancements? The only way we can start to do more of that is on the fly, which those GPU-backed enabled instances allow us to do. And like anything, it's becoming more and more commoditized, which means it's the cost of it is falling and reducing, and we can start to leverage that. So I kind of feel like if I take a sensible view, where's this going? I think we need to make better use of the innovations we've got, right? Sitting in a lab and just concepting, innovative ideas is great. If we can't get them adopted and can't get them to market, it's a pointless exercise.
Adoption, that's the big... The adoption, and the adoption determines the level of consumer impact, right? So that's the thing. If it's a capability or a technology that only a very few people can access or will have access to, then you can make an argument that the adoption will, over time, perhaps struggle until such time as people's devices and services are just have that stuff under the hood by default. So, in terms of consumer impact, I think it's an interesting one, because that point you made about 1080 and 4K is a really interesting one. It's like, if you ask the customer, do they care what the resolution is? They probably say, or an end user, they probably say, what? Do you prefer 1080 or 4K? What now? Sorry, what?
I think if I could
what I just want is a great picture.
That's right.
That is stable.
That's right.
That looks, to my eyes, really good.
And if you put a 1080p with HDR and a 4K with HDR picture encoded in the right way on two screens, I don't think a majority of the audience would know the difference.
No. It's an interesting one, isn't it? So actually, in many respects, I think just all of the things we've talked about in this episode, really, being efficient, doing more with less, driving those performance gains. They actually, in a weird way, well, maybe not even in a weird way, but in a maybe slightly less direct than you might hope for, but still meaningful way, connect all the way through to the customer, who should get a better experience out of it.
Totally agree. Yeah, totally agree.
And in terms of, we've gone across quite a few things today, right? We've gone across a bit about evolution, so the challenges. We've talked a bit about where innovation is within the domain of streaming infrastructure. Thought a little bit about the future as well. So we've covered a fair bit of ground, but to wrap for our episode today, what do you think? Is there anything that is a final thought, or anything that's still, I like the way, maybe a way to frame it is, anything that still surprises you around streaming infrastructure today that you would want to share? Is it this idea of the bitter pill? I know that's something that's been on your mind previously. And again, you're blessed with the experience of that real world knowledge. You've been there and done it. What is the thing that surprises you when you speak to customers, partners? You're at events a lot. That you maybe it's the unspoken thing, or maybe it's the thing that you keep hearing and don't expect to. Is it that bitter pill, do you think?
I do. I think there's the cost element of streaming platforms. People go, we don't know why it's so expensive. I'm like, well, like the answer is
Because
it's there, and I feel like people don't want to hear that debate or that argument sometimes. Building platforms is hard, right? That's a reality. And actually, because of the SaaS world, people think it's easier. They think, well, I can just go, and you're right. From the sense of I can bolt something together and I can make a feature-rich service, that is easier. If you want to get to the 50, 70, 90 million subscriber rates and peak concurrency rates, you can't do that with the way that we do. You're putting a lot of trust in external vendors to just deliver. You can't load test and scale test easily, probably even if at all, for that kind of number. You can get to a point where you say, okay, like, we can get from here to here, we can simulate, and if you were to extrapolate that out, we think it might work, but you're still taking a gamble. So I think you're right, that bitter pill over, you have to spend some dollars and change the way that you think, and not just rapid developing and engineering, you have to do this in a really measured way to reduce the TCO. You've got to go back and tackle technical debt, right? You've got to strip out inefficient API calls, get rid of those SDKs and libraries that you're using for marketing 5 years ago that you don't even use anymore. The subscription's gone, right?
So some of that money has got to go away from feature to
you've got to
sell some fix things, optimize.
That's right. Yeah, if you want to reduce the cost, more users per box fundamentally, right?
Understood. Well, look, I mean, I think we have covered a good amount of ground today. We've done it in a nice amount of detail as well, I think. Thank you very much for being our guest today. It's been fabulous. I think for users of viewers of the podcast, if you want to subscribe, please do. If you want to drop a like, please do. Thanks again to Chris for being a wonderful guest today. And when you're talking about technology these days, sometimes it is good to pause, rewind, and play.